If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. Will I say again I'm excited? No, I won't say that, but I am. We're carrying on here with 3-1 Battalion. We're trying to bring this unit to you, the Bushmen Battalion, also known as 201. We're bringing it to you to introduce it to you. And that is why we have these members with us. We're carrying on where we stopped last week. Now, just to recap, I asked the men in front of me, all our guests. One is sadly missing in action, but don't worry about that. We will get hold of them one by one as well. And we will get hold of the Bushman soldiers also at some stage. And we're going to bring out one of these guys for you probably on a weekly basis until they get fed up with legacy, which I hope is not soon. And we asked them, where do you come from? How did you end up in the army? And how did you end up in the battalion? And once you reached the battalion, what happened to you? And almost all of them, except the one loggy here, Uncle Bob, and we'll get to him, all of them said something like, first we arrived and we walked into, well, we were put through our paces. They said something like that. They said they had to run, they had to walk, they had to earn that crown, which they wear on the uniform. Fascinating. Colonel Brian Adams also spoke about the crowd, and he said that he cheated a bit. He and the RSM, they walked at night or something like that. I do remember him saying rank has its privileges, but you have to remember these notes, these men in front of you, at that stage were probably half his age. By the time that Colonel Brian Adams got there, he must have been about 32, 35, around about there, 34 perhaps. These guys were 18 years old, 19 years old. And as you know, at 18, 19 years old, your body can take tremendous punishment. You really can. But now it's getting fascinating because now we're at the stage, and this is where we're going to start, where these men have now graduated, so to speak. They're in the unit, they're taking their first dop, their first drink there at the bar. They're now grown up, they have a leadership element. Now they have to go and lead these Bushman soldiers, who's probably twice their age. Highly experienced guys. They've been fighting the war since long before we arrived on the scene in Angola. They came down south. It's a fantastic story. It is really worth it. And we'll get one of the historical, often type of guys here on the show to come and tell us exactly how they were created. And now they're ready for the fight. That's why they're there. They didn't come to the army to sit around in the Republic or the States, as the army used to call the place. They came to fight. I think like any unit, the attitude is one of, well, they actually came to end the fight because they're not going to lose. They're going to kick ass. And that's what I want to hear now. But before you can do anything in the military, you get issued. Yes, you stand in a damn queue and they give you the ammunition, the hand grenades, you sign for these things. You don't just get it. It's not Hollywood. It doesn't work like that. It's the same with your medical kit. You sign for everything in that medical kit. And if you lose something, you have to put a report in. You know, it's not, I'm not saying things were not stolen in the army or in the police where I was, but I can tell you, in a highly disciplined unit like this, you just don't get away with nonsense. Not in the South African army. It's the same with medals. You do not get medals in the South African army without reason. It's always astonishing to me when I still worked in the shadows in Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa, I would meet these American soldiers. And the guy's 25 years old and he got about 54 medals. Man, he looks like Idi Amin himself. And he's as fat as a pig and he's sweating there. And then he's probably gay because he's holding his mate's hands. Now, that's fair enough. I don't want to go into that. I wrote enough books on this. But the fact is, for the African guy, who you're trying to get information, to find the terrorist, he's not going to respect such a man. And if these guys sitting in front of us, this white leader group, had any type of racism in there, the Bushmen will reject them. And that unit will fold. It never happened. The unit didn't fold. We have to remember that. Right, and now there's enough speaking on my part. Uncle Bob, you were the loggy, and you're very proud of that. And you were not only a loggy, you got blown up by a landmine as well on one of these horrible vehicles the army had, the Buffles. In my own life, I've only been on a Buffle once. I lasted about 2 miles and I started throwing up like a drunk matroos. I couldn't take that thing swaying. It's not a Casper. It was most dreadful. And I started running next to it. And anybody who knows me will know I believe in the Bible, Proverbs 28 verse 1. Only the wicked shall run without being chased. So for me to get off that buffalo and to start running was dreadful. Anyway, Uncle Bob, tell me, what happens at Loggy? What happens if these guys go out on patrols?
First of all, I just want to put it into context here and say that the battalion had, when I was there, we had 4 companies, and each company had 4 platoons, and then we had the recce wing. But the companies were made up of the Bushmen soldiers and the leader group, for want of a better way of saying it, the platoon commanders and the platoon sergeants and such like, of which were both white and Bushman guys. Their families, however, were there as well. So we had about 5,000 Bushmen in total living in the base, in their different companies. And each company had an HQ, and each one of these guys was dealt into a company, and they came to us on an individual basis, company-wise, and we had to provide them with food. The accommodation was done at the company level for the Bushmen, and clothing, ammunition, weapons, obviously, transport, booze in the pubs, you name it. It was, because of the location of the unit in the middle of the Caprivi, the closest depot was Rundu, which was 240 kilometers away. So everything had to be driven in or delivered to us by convoy, by the logistic units. And we had to work together with Donnie and Ziggy and Dion and those guys with their companies to get strengths and requirements from each one of them, which we collated, and then we would send that stuff off and get supplied accordingly. And our guys worked on a basis of, there were 2 companies in the bush, 2 companies in the base. There were 2 types of Bushmen, or whatever one wants to call them. The one was Barakwena and the other one was the Vasakela. And they worked, one Barakwena company, one Vaskela company. 2 of them were in the bush, 2 in the base. In the base, they did the getting together with everything, sorting everything out, recapping what they did the previous tour that they were out, and preparing to go to the bush in the next 6-week cycle. They used to give their requirements into us. We had that time period within which to get a hold of and obtain that sort of equipment that they were going to need, ammunition and weapons more specifically. And then in certain cases, like for instance, there was a changeover period at one stage when the guys were using Caspers and not just Buffles. I had to go and fight like hell, tooth and nail in Grootfontein to get hold of the Caspers, because the Caspers were going to 101 all the time and to the Kufut guys. So we had that sort of thing. And then we also had the footgear, because for want of a better word, the opponents, let's just call them that, the Swapu and whatever, they had special footgear that was marked in a certain way. And we had to be careful not to wear anything similar to that unless it was for a specific reason. The normal army boots, they worked, but they got pretty uncomfortable after, I think, 1 or 2 of the tours out in the bush with the guys, although some of the guys used their own. We were lucky, us and 3-2 got hold of what they call the flat sole boots. They were brown leather canvas combination boots. We also got at some point or other in the early 80s, we got the Mashila. It was a brown canvassy type of a backpack, which the guys wore. And then to make it even more interesting, the boots turned into a black and green. No, the first boot, yeah, the first boots were brown and we had the brown backpacks. Then we got the black and green ones and we got the green backpacks, or was it the other way around? Were the first the green backpacks, rugzakken, and then the brown ones. But the boots changed and everybody wanted those boots. It was a major issue. But the only two units that could get hold of them were 3.2 and 3.1. And when people saw them in the bush, if they didn't watch their gear, that was the first thing that disappeared. And I think the guys that did ops, especially Dion in the latter years, can attest to that. If you were casevaced, I think probably you chucked your boots back in the bush so that the guys could bring them home for you, because if you went to hospital, you never saw them again. You know, it's things like that that made the unit stand out. What was also phenomenal, and I think the guys did mention it at one stage, was the chefs that we had in the base that fed us in our mess were probably the best guys in the Defence Force. Two of them that I know specifically both worked at the academy before they came to Omega. We had visitors up the yin yang from all over the world, brought in by whichever party was responsible for that sort of stuff, and they had to be fed. And they were looked after like kings. The base was always in a beautiful condition, and all that stuff had to be catered for. I can give you a small example of something. The Bushmen by nature are small people. It was extremely difficult to find the right clothing for them. And if you did, you didn't always find enough of it. And at one stage, somebody contacted us at the base and said they found a whole bunch of boxes of stuff in the depot in Pretoria, small clothing. So I jumped on the next flossie and I went through and I had a look at the stuff, and it was perfect, but it was female clothing. And all the browns were exactly the same, except the buttons worked the other way around and the zips worked, or the pants button, die gulp, hy werk andersom. But when I contacted the unit and I told them this, the guys said, bring the stuff, they probably won't notice it. Well, the people didn't know the Bushmen well enough, because when the stuff arrived, they all knew it was coming. They stood in queues outside the store and I started issuing the stuff to them. And it must have been about half an hour and they came back. Oh, lines of them come back. They give the stuff. This vrouwmens klere hierdie. What was a woman called in Bushman? Not Makua was us. I forget. But they brought it back. So you had to contend with issues like that. I remember specifically the changeover from the R1 to the R4. Although many of our guys, when they operated, they used foreign weapons, AKs and RPDs and PKMs and all the rest of it. But when the changeover was done, the companies took their guys to the shooting range and they let them shoot with their weapons to sort of familiarize themselves with them. And we issued them. When they saw the bullets, they were not happy because they half the size. The first group that went out with them, I think, was Delta Company, if I remember correctly. And as it was, Sergeant Kamama Makua, he was on a buffel, and they had made contact, and there was some shooting, and these guys that they were shooting at just turned and ran, and he got fed up shooting with his R1. The buffel driver had an R1. Kamama was shooting with the R4. He threw the R4 down, grabbed the buffel driver's R1 out of his turret that he sits in, and he shot the guy. And the guy, obviously the R1 bullet hit him, went right through his backpack, tumbled him down, and that was it. And of course, the lead was taken from there. When they came back, they got off the flossie, and as they walked back to their companies, they walked past the store, they all put their weapons down, the R4. They didn't want to. It was a huge I don't know what the right word is, to try and eventually they got around to it, but it was a major issue at one stage. We had to issue them with the R1s again. They simply refused to use the R4. It was a better weapon for them to use because it was smaller. So those were the unusual things that we had to contend with. But we managed. Many times I used to teach my guys, if they were ever in a store, they were not to come out of the store without something which they hadn't signed for, which wasn't always the right thing to do, but that's how we got stock. I drove to Rundu with the well-known Major Kun Upton, and that was in 77. We had a couple of beers in the pub. He used to take me with him because he would say, oh, he's Batman, so I could drink in the pub with him. That night, he decided when we came out, we must remember that we needed tires for our trucks. And remember now, we had those Bedford Mercedes converted combined vehicles that they'd made and built. The Portuguese refugees had built them up for us. So we had different size wheels, in many occasions. And we walked around Rundu base that night. And wherever we found a spare wheel that fitted, we rolled it into a corner, and we eventually came with our what do you want to call it, Mercedes. And we loaded. We drove out there that night with about 12 wheels, not just tires, wheels, complete wheels. And that was how we struggled to get, but you made a plan. They say a boer maak 'n plan, so we made a plan. But generally, the guys would put the request for supplies in. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before they left, in the middle of their changeover time. They'd start getting all their stuff ready. The guys would come back from leave. I had to make sure I had sufficient ammo for them. If they couldn't take all the ammo with them, I had to make sure that the ammo was in Ordangs or Shikati or wherever they were going to in Congo. Same with the weapons. So it was but it was always very organized. Each company was accountable for their stuff. There were certain things that were sort of in control of the company, and then the rest was in control of each individual. The individuals used to come to their store because many of them liked to use specific weapons, and they used to draw the weapons, not necessarily R1s, but that's how we used to work. And you accommodated the man had to do a job. If he was comfortable with that thing, then you accommodate, depending on where they were operating. We also found that there was a lot of, what is the word? Frustration in a way, in a sense, initially in the big bases like Ondangwa and Oshakati, when our guys went in there, we asked them not to take the AKs in with them, rather use your friend's R1 or your friend's R4 or something when you walked into the base, because there were always problems when the guys were seen with the AK, especially from the senior officers and so on in the bases. And you had to contend with all those kind of things. And of course, those type of weapons had a way of disappearing. So you had to find a way to control them to a certain extent. But most of our guys, we never had a problem with, not by a long shot. They all had their different ideas about what ammunition they wanted to take with them, what mortars they wanted to take, which mortar bombs they were using. The recce wing, more specifically, those guys, they had some weird and wonderful ideas that they did with stuff. But then so did our company guys. So yeah, it was to me, it was a pleasure. I loved working with those. It was difficult, but it was no walk in the park by any means. But we used to get T-bone steaks for supper. We used to get meals that most guys never got anywhere else on the border. And one of the reasons that we used that for it was because the Bushmen had a different diet. They ate meat, just meat. We used to get truckloads of carcasses for them that their wives used to come and cut up themselves and take. So we used that, we milked that opportunity. And then, of course, because we had the visitors, they had to have special meals. We used to really milk that as well. So we had T-bones and fillets and steaks and crayfish and stuff. Not all the time, not every day or every weekend, but we did have it, and we had a ball up there from there. Well, why not? You know, it was our base. We lived in a beautiful base. Yeah, and the log supply points were Rundu, and if you couldn't get it at Rundu, then you went to Grootfontein. There was 16 maintenance unit, was the depot in Grootfontein, and what was the one in Rundu was, I forget, but we had to work via Rundu because we were part of Sector 20, and if we couldn't come right there, then we went to Grootfontein. And that's basically it. I don't know if the other guys have got any other suggestions with regard to stuff like that. Yeah, it was an interesting aspect. So in our stores section, the log section, we had a log officer. Most cases he was an acting individual, a quartermaster, a regimental quartermaster, and we had a couple of storemen. And we had to look after everything. We ran the entire base. The only thing we didn't supply was the water. That was Piet Frankenberg's job. He was a signaller, but he was also the genie that gave us the water. We had the tiffies. When vehicles broke down, we had to get spares for the vehicles. We had to do preventative maintenance programs on all the vehicles. And we had different kinds of vehicles, very, very unusual vehicles, especially in Ziggy and Dani's time. They had little Suzuki Jeeps, and they had those mini mokes and motorbikes and some sorts of other vehicles as well. But such was life. We made do, and we got on and did our job. The log lines were long, but we made them work, and eventually they worked very well. So from that point of view, it was a tough place to be in, but you know, when things get tough, then the tough get going. You had to just step up and be counted, and it was worth it, absolutely worth it. I don't know what the other guys feel about it.
Can I just ask you, where did you get the ammunition for the Soviet type of weapons?
Through our logistic lines, mostly. The actual original origin, I couldn't really go into much detail about that. I would be guessing, but I can well imagine where most of it came from. But yeah, we had a very impressive, well-organized arms corps company, Denel, that worked, and there was nothing that those guys couldn't do in those days. So yeah, they did look after us. I mean, the AK is what probably you're referring to. Most of the ammunition that all those weapons used was AK rounds. I think, if I speak correctly now, if I remember correctly, the Dragunov used a different round, which was the Russian sniper, and then the PK, no, not the PK, yeah, the PKM maybe it had a longer, more like an R1. I'm not sure. Andre and Dion might be able to tell you there, but generally the AK round fitted everything. That's basically, but we got the stuff from Rundu, and there were times when the oaks were in the bush and they saw this box lying under the tree, and they picked it up and loaded it on a biffle, and they brought it with them. You know, it was just one of those things that but it was always pretty well controlled from a central stores position, and then from each company. The guys lived in their Kimbos with their ammunition, their weapons, and their ammo was always at hand. I don't recall, unless it was an unusual weapon that was locked away in the stores, but their personal weapons they had with them at all times, and they just kept control of it that way. We never had problems. We never, very, very few times. I think the only time that there was ever any queries about stuff that we had to write off things was if there was in some serious ops and there was equipment lost or the guys had to scatter or whatever the case may be and get the hell out of a place and there was stuff left behind, then they would come along and give us a report about it, and we'd use the report and write the stuff off. There were lots of loopholes, obviously, but nonetheless, that's how we followed the procedures that were there to be followed. Why are you smiling at that, Ziggy? But generally, we never had a problem. There were times, occasionally, that we struggled to get certain equipment, but we operated in Sector 10, which was the Oshikati area. So if we couldn't get hold of the stuff in Sector 10 or Sector 20, where we were based, I used to contact the guys up in Oshikati and through Ondangwa. We used to put our requisitions in, and we got our supplies. It was when the guys were operating in the bush, let's just call it in the bush, and they had to be resupplied. It was all done out of Oshikati and Ondangwa on the rum runs, on the choppers at night, or wherever, if there was big ops, the vehicles were there, the support vehicles, and they did it. But all that stuff came out of the stores in Oshikati and Ondangwa. So we were lucky. We worked in we lived in one area, worked in another area, and we had access to both the support centrums. And then I think ultimately we were lucky enough to get the base in Congo. Dion will remember it, I think, which was a base that we were eventually given. It used to be part of 5-4 Battalion up on the Cup line. We were given the base as our satellite base. We managed it and ran it and staffed it and had stores there and everything. Our guys used to troop straight there and straight back out from there. We didn't always have to go to Ondangwa, which made life a lot easier for everybody. Initially, it was a bit of a pain because we were not allowed to supply from Sector 20 to that base because it fell in a different sector, and for control purposes, it was somebody else's problem. But when we got those log lines sorted out, the A and the B echelon movement of stuff, then it worked. It was no problem. And ultimately, we did our thing and we did it. The guys did their job pretty well.
Yeah, when Bob's talking about suppliers, we had a base in the early years that was a Kwandu base. That was close to the Zambian border. So a lot of our suppliers also came from Mapacha. And Sergeant Woody, also a character on his own. For instance, I go back to booze. You can see what I did on the border. But in any case, our beers were like 25 cents. No, the beers were 20 cents and the Cokes were 25 cents. And Red Hot rum was about R3.50 a bottle, 750 ml. Now, and Kwandu only had beer and Coke. So as a leader group, the Bushmen weren't allowed alcohol except for beer, but we were allowed to drink, well, I don't know if we were allowed to, we just took the advantage of, because the OC of a company was a two-pip lieutenant. The company sergeant major was a PF corporal. So rank was short in 3-1 in the early days. We did what we wanted to, sorry. But at the end of the day, we would give Woody our money, and he would go and sort it out from Mapacha, get us a bottle of rum. And if you came into the pub in the evening, each guy had a bottle of rum with his little minor would have a Z on the bottle. It stayed in the pub. The guys would share their Coke, but not their rum. That was always interesting to me. But the same as with supplies on uniform. In our days, when we went over clandestine, we had to scavenge what we could get. We never looked like an organized, we looked like Kelly's Heroes or something like that. But we had all kinds of mixed, AKs were scarce. We used mostly the G3 when we did clandestine. I didn't like it as just for me, by a blikkerig. But at the end of the day, the mashallah that Bob mentioned earlier, we still had the original stuff taken out of Angola. The stuff that we had was basically, it would be fapla, it would be webbing. Webbing, for instance, the normal infantry webbing 7 magazines was your first line. No. At 13 magazines. You carried 13 R1 magazines on you, and you had to adapt your webbing. I had a FNL A or whatever, the belt with a lot of holes. And that we modified, we made our own webbing. After first contact, chasing after the guys with 13 magazines, you were injured. Your body was scraped like hell, shaved all over. So we devised. Everything was in the early days was ons het basies daai oorlog begin met trial and error. And yeah, so when we went over, we had virtually no South African stuff with us. I think we were from the first guys that started using the TR-48s. I'm a qualified signaler, but I don't remember all the radios. But TR-48, lekker swaar met sy draaidingetjie daarbo. We had it, and even then, we weren't allowed to speak Afrikaans. Donnie will contest to that. All signals were in English, and that was maar 'n probleem. Ek sal daai storie in die boek vertel van die for the Kazavak. I mean, that is a story on its own. Want as jy vir iemand sê he's excreting and vomiting blood, and the guy is Afrikaans, aan die ander kant, dan verstaan hy nie. Now, that is a story op sy eie. But I think on the supply side, Bob has got it quite clear. And another thing is even food, even our food that we carried over, we didn't have rat packs in that early stage because rat packs were all identified to South Africa. I mean, I can remember having Bull brand made by Her Majesty's whatever. Die blikkies het nie papier op gehad nie. The tins were yellow painted tins. But our coffee and stuff, we carried it by the tin with no label on, condensed milk by the tin. Rat packs we weren't allowed to take with us. So ons het swaar gedra. En ja, maar nie lekker in die bos geëet nie. You always knew when you got back to the base, Bob and them would have sorted out with good food. So that on the logistics side, I think that's a quick and short sum up of my time. Me and Donnie were in more or less the same time. Hy's bietjie ouer as ek. Bietjie, maar in elk geval, daar's hy.
Okay, just to add to the guys, the supply system in the base. Every company had what we call the lynloper. Now, I don't know what the translation is of a lynloper. Now, every Bushman woman that was married had a small disc on a line around the neck, and on that disc it stated, for instance, 4 adults, 3 whatever. They used to come to this lynlopers, and they had a sort of a hockey or whatever, and then he would supply accordingly to that disc on a neck. And she took it back to the tents or the kimbos, and from there they actually that's how they got their food. But strangely, the meat hung over tents. Sometimes the flies were more than the meat on the things, but that's how they lived. As to and this lynlopers exactly knew what was going on, except the Bushmen had a terrible thing. They swapped the wives, it was now it married this one or that one, so it often changed the discs as well. And Dion will know about the marriages quickly on a Monday morning before a parade. As to the weapons, always a shortage. Whether it was G13s, whether it was HK21s, the LMG, the G3 LMG, to put it that way. So whenever ops was coming in, you immediately knew of it. There's no chance of keeping it secret because we had to go and bum weapons from the other companies. There was never enough mags, never enough. I think Ziggy can say it as well. So everybody knew, although everything had to be kept secret. And that was basically the weapons that coming back to the ammo for the AK, the 7.62 by 39 mil. At one stage, the ammo that arrived there was a sort of a grey ammo, a lacquered cartridge, and in that and had no markings at the back. So that was also clandestine at one stage. The kit was very uncomfortable, especially the rucksacks. It was very uncomfortable initially. I believe Dion and them had Masilas. Yeah, and as I understood the record, believe it or not, for a guy going over to the other side, it was Ben Wolf. I've got it on black and white from him, that he carried 67 kilograms over and that's a hell of a weight for any person to carry. Yeah, that's basically from my side, but food excellent in the base. Breakfast, something fantastic. I mean, you had orange juice, everything. It was all according to a certain, we used to sit down, eat a nice meal. And of course, everybody, if you say 3-1 battalion, everybody will tell you something about a pau. It's a roll, like Portuguese roll, and everybody knew a roll. And used to put that in our pockets, and we used to eat it after time. But that was Omega, the best cooks on earth. And the food, excellent. Nobody could have complained about that.
I think we should now go to Dion, because he was me a bit later than the rest of you, and ask how the supply situation was with him.
Okay, as Donnie said, Ben Wolf, I think, carried the 67 kilograms. Being an officer or a leader element in your platoon meant nothing. There's no privileges in terms of you carrying light or anything like that. First of all, I think our minimum rat packs were for 7 days at a time, and that means in the winter your water as well. Being an officer, I carried my own radio, I carried my own rats. I helped carry mortar bombs, RPG-7s, flares, white phos grenades. So you were pretty loaded, as Donnie said. And initially, when you got introduced to your Bushmen, they sort of tried to test you. And then every like 5-10 minutes, there would be a different one walking in front of you, trying to push the pace. And if you fell for it, you would have been non-compass mentors within about 2 or 3 hours. They would have just walked you into the ground. So you had to prove yourself, and then once they accepted you, that's it. They would actually give their life to you or for you in circumstances. I liked obviously I wasn't at the time when we carried R1s. The R4s came after my time. But I distinctly remember that story with, as Bob mentioned, where the guys just threw the R4s in the sand and said, bring Sukai R1 weer, Luitenantie, Sukai R1. I liked to carry 2 weapons, depending where we were working and what we were doing. I always obviously had my 9mm star on my hip or on my webbing. Then most of the time R1, occasionally AK-47, and then I also like to, once or twice I carried. Bob will remember we had Pietro Beretta shotguns at one stage in the armament store. So and I remember 2 officers. I actually carried the shotgun with buckshot, and I must admit it's actually quite a decent weapon for the bush warfare. I just wonder why it wasn't used more often. It's just something that sort of puzzled me, because it was really a decent weapon to use. At any given time, I think we're about like 350 to 400 white echelon, if you want to call it that, within the base itself. But as Bob said, it wasn't a base, it was a town, because I was 18 years old. I looked after my 30 men in my platoon, plus the wives, plus the mom and pop, and the kids and everyone. I delivered a baby once because they refused to go to the Sikitali, or the sick bay, as they call it, the Sikitali. Squatting behind the bush. The lieutenant was the only one allowed around. No medic, no nothing. And what the hell did I know about it? But you learn quickly. You learn very quickly. Then, obviously, in the base, while you're in the base, it's amazing how different skills come out. Now, also one of these 6 weeks in the bush, 6 weeks in the base, we did a little base maintenance, and the runway was pretty new at the base, so it had to be fenced. And there's no fencing contractor or anyone called up. The farmers amongst the boys showed us what to do. The Tiffies made tools for us to use, and we fenced our own runway. We also fenced the Bushmen horses. At one stage were quite plentiful, and they needed to be contained. So we fenced corrals for them as well. All variety of 18, 19 years old, and you're picking up all these weird and wonderful skills. So it was always challenging, always fun. Yeah, Ziggy and them, as you said, they didn't have the rat packs, but we carried 7 days rats. And then you either got replenished via a chopper in the bush, wherever you were working in Angola or wherever. Chopper used to come in, you prepare the LZ, and they come and drop off, and you quickly distribute, and then off you go again. As per the arms and ammo, my personal trommel as such, when we did trooping, was a RPG-7 case. And as Bob said, we got our ammo from all sorts of places, and the tag and the writing on my RPG-7 case on the inside was actually Mid-Eastern. So it was all the typical Mid-Eastern squiggles and stuff. So clearly that was not sourced from a normal channel as such. You carried your own radios, you carried your own food, you carried extra ammunition, you carried mortar bombs. So it was fun. It was fun and games. I had an interesting meetup with my platoon. As we finished the orientation, I think I was in the base for about 3 or 4 days, and my one white platoon sergeant, well, it was a corporal, both of them, Ben Ellis and old Kevin Dreyer, and myself. I was a one clip loot at that stage. We were flown into the bush. Chopper landed, the Puma. We dropped out. Linda Pitter said, "How's it? I'm Linda Pitter. Goodbye. See you later." And the 3 of them jumped onto the chopper, and here I'm standing with 30 Bushmen that I've never met from a bar of soap in the middle of the bush, taking over my platoon. So it was nerve-wracking. It was interesting. Yeah, but I'll keep more of that story for the book as well, obviously. But never a dull moment. And if you got back to the base, and Bob mentioned there were klomp stoutgatte amongst us, but not necessarily stoutgatte, but what you did is you did your base maintenance the first 2 weeks or the first 3 weeks as quickly as possible. And then you did have a bit of R&R. You could go and draw the Unimog from the vehicle park, and a couple of hot boxes full of T-bone steaks, and you go down to Kwando or the river and go and a couple with a box of M26 hand grenades, and you go and fish and fun and have a bit of R&R. So there was never a dull moment. It was always fun. It was always interesting. And yeah, this book. And this is the type of thing that we need to, it's all the fun and games and the hard slog that we need to tell and write in the book. And that's the idea behind the whole thing.
Can I ask you, I spoke a lot to the 3-2 battalion people, obviously, before you guys. And I see a lot of similarities. Now, the 3-2 battalion men were not always allowed inside the other bases. They would arrive at some base, and the commander of that base would just tell them to go and sleep outside. We're not allowed inside. Were the Bushmen treated in that disrespectful way also?
Some instances definitely. Even at one stage, a couple of the bars in the operational area we were not allowed to enter. So when you trooped, you had your own 1 or 2 bottles of Red Hot in your ammo box or in your trommel. So you carried it anyway, regardless of what the rules and regulations were, or you just bought some from someone that was willing to part with his or hers. But unfortunately there were a couple of incidences, and then it's always sad where. And you still find it if you look at social media now, and some of the comments that are made. And I think we've all seen it, we've all experienced it. That I would give as much as I got from my Bushmen to them, and what I received from them back. And and for some people to play the race card and stuff like that, my blood boil. I'll go off my rocker. But unfortunately, yes, it did happen. It did happen, and it was up to us to sort it out and tell him, listen, you must come right. I mean, these oaks are very better soldiers than you ever be. No, that sort of thing.
I wonder if I can ask the rest opinion on that question as well. If you ever felt that the Bushmen were not treated fairly, because we do know that the Bushmen as a group of people were not always that popular with the rest of the locals. And I also know that the women were very much in demand. And therefore, before the war, I'm talking traditionally now, it's Africa after all, they were attacked by the other tribes and they were sometimes slaughtered for many, many reasons. And the problem with a Bushman is he looks like a Bushman. And I don't mean it to say bad in any sense of a word, but he's got a certain way of build. He's not the biggest chap around. He looks like a Bushman. And of course, your unit had very special hats. I don't know what you call it. You look different from the rest. It's not a beret. Have you ever felt that the other units were perhaps a bit jealous?
Yeah, I mean, remember when Group Alpha and Group Bravo started, these guys were persecuted. They were hunted like animals in Angola. And we took them under our wing, come hell or high water, and we had to look after them. So we did come across a lot of that. I'm sure Donnie and Z can elaborate a little bit more because they were even earlier than me. So, but it was definitely a problem that had to be dealt with.
Okay, just to get back with what Dion said now, he's absolutely right. But if you look at the history coming through Angola, if you look at everything there, they were persecuted even when they went back after 201 battalions. Well, wasn't anymore. They were also killed there. I took a platoon of Bushmen, I think was one of the first guys to take them into Kavango to a place called Mapungu Flay. And there was a civilian unit there. I think it was Witwatersrand Commando under Major Pinechek. Fantastic guy. And you could feel immediately when we moved in, there was a bit of tension. But 2-3 days later, everything had disappeared. And it was, and yes, now he said a Bushman looks like a Bushman. Okay, not quite if you've been there for some time, but the Barraquinas were black Bushmen, big Bushmen. They from northern Botswana, the Caprivi area, whereas the Vasikelas, the yellow ones, were much smaller. And even between the two tribes, there was a bit of tension every time they worked in different companies while I was at Amiga. I'm not quite sure what happened later on, but I worked with the Vasikelas, the yellow ones. So there was tension, you could feel it, and it's exactly what we used. They had a hate, I don't know if I should put it that way, for the blacks, and that's why they were good soldiers. We used that factor, and it worked like magic because they had been persecuted all the time. Their wives were used as prostitutes. Even when they were Fletchers in Angola, what happened was that the women were kept away from them, and only when they got back as a reward, the women could talk to them, and again, they could socialize. So definitely there was tension. There was, I wouldn't say racial tension, but there was a problem. You could feel it on. But we lived in a time as well, in a political climate where everything was like that. But we accept, I mean, Flip and Dion will say the same, the other guys, we slept in the same sleeping bag sometimes because it was cold. We ate out of the same tin of food. If they hunted, we ate with them. If they got anything to eat, it wasn't strange to sit with them and share their food because they were our comrades. We were dependent on them more than they were on us because they knew the bush. They were the masters in the bush. And that was, no university could have taught me anything better than just the year I was with them. And that's how I could put it.
Yeah, no, what Donnie said there is true. When it came to eating and stuff, I have an incident where in my platoon, something we must mention, the leader group with the platoon, a normal platoon has a lieutenant and a corporal, and then the lance corporal section leaders. With the Bushmen, it was totally different. We had a lieutenant, we had a platoon sergeant and assistant platoon sergeant, so 2 white corporals. Then we had a Bushman sergeant and a Bushman corporal. So our leader group was quite, because of the communications, most of our troops couldn't speak English or Afrikaans. They spoke Portuguese or Bushman or Vaskala or whatever. But the oldest gentleman in our platoon was an excellent bushcraft, and water was always a problem. I have an incident that I will basically bring up in the book too, where Fires and myself, Fires was my assistant corporal, later on 4 Recce, but we followed the old man because we knew he was up to something. And he found water, and he basically took, this was unreal, this is while you're in the bush, we took a piece of grass and formed a straw, and sucked the water out of a tree, the mosquito larvae and stuff and that, and basically spat it over in a bottle. You drank that water directly from his mouth because that was survival. I mean, if you ask me now, even one of you guys, I wouldn't drink out the same glass that you basically backwashed in. I mean, even no matter what it was, even if it was Dettol, I wouldn't drink it after it's been in your mouth. So that is the type of thing that basically we went through. It's like Dani said, you slept together. They looked after us. I can remember one night where Fires had no water, and I mean, water was cold, where they went around, one of the Bushmen, and took a little bit of water from, not us, they did it themselves. Basically took from their rations that they had still and gave Fires. And Fires remembers the names. Ek kan een gesig onthou, but a name I'm very difficult. But at the end of the day, it was a life. When I left 3-1 Battalion, I always wanted to go back. Even when my wife visited the base with me in mind, when I was the acting RSM of the Walfish Bay Commando, I was invited to the 10th birthday. When my wife, who's scared of snakes, just like you, Chris, we spent 3 days in the base, she said to me, if you join PF and you get called up to this base, I'm coming with. That was our base. That was our people. Even the way the wives, when I came back in 84, and I took my wife through to the platoon, you had guys, your old platoon coming to you, guys that had been shut up in the contact that, I must say this, if he was a South African citizen, he wouldn't have fought another battle. These guys came back 4 years, well, it was 1979, so 5 years later, I bumped into one of our troops that was Kazovac, totally had an open heart surgery because of shrapnel lodged near his heart. He was fighting again. But that welcome that you got after 5 years, that they could remember you, and the welcome your wife got, my wife felt she was at home. That's one thing. They are a very loving people. Don't get on their wrong side. I can guarantee you they can be just, I actually compare them to the Japanese culture. Japanese are very friendly, don't get on their bad side. I've been in Japan too, and I can tell you it's the same culture. Different tribe, different education, everything. But that's it. That's from my side.
I can add a bit of meat to the bone there when it comes to your question about the being allowed into the different bases and stuff like that. In the early days, you must remember Alpha Group and Bravo Group, which became 3-1 and 3-2. They were treated specially, apart from the fact that they were special units. They were treated specially, they were treated differently. We got away with a lot more than the average bases and the average units and the average people in the places like Rundu and Grootfontein. The result was a lot of resentment, because if there were 10 weapons in the store and I put in a bid for them and they had 100 people that didn't have weapons, I probably would have got 8 of them and they would get 2. So they used to be uptight about things like that. Same with the lorry story, with the tires and things like that. Then when it came to, if the guys were stuck, they arrived at a base or near a base or whatever, and they were going to sleep out. Many times the Bushmen preferred to be on their own. But when they were given their beer, sometimes they got a bit out of hand, and it was raucous and whatnot. And for that matter, so did the leader group. And so we got a bit of a reputation, and not just us 3-2 battalion as well. And that is why many of the commanding officers and whatnot wouldn't allow us in the base. They used to call us. If we were in Nkongo, if I was in Oshakati, they would say to us, we're going to feed your people tonight. You need to see that they got food for tomorrow. They're sleeping outside our base. And the OC used to go through the roof. But there was not much you could do about it. The Bushmen, I remember an incident in the early 70s where the Bushmen they ended up in a base or in a place with a lot of the 3-2 battalion soldiers, and Dani touched on it. There was nearly a massacre. The guys didn't get on because it was the old FNLA, and then they just didn't like each other. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of TLC and everything to get both of the battalions. And in the end, not often, but they did work together from time to time in the bush under heavy conditions. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was because of guys like Koen Upton and Ben Wolf, and for that matter myself and other guys, when we went somewhere and we needed stuff, if we couldn't get it, we took it, because it was we had to improvise. Like Ziggy said, they were in the bush. The clothes that were in my clandestine store were everything you could think of. Wherever they got something that was not sort of South African, it was chucked into the boxes, and the guys would come and see what fitted them, and off they would go to the bush and so on. And so the same was with they used to improvise and make jacket webbing, chest webbing, ways of means of carrying their stuff. And we were lucky because we had what was called the Needlework Center. And we had an old lady working there by the name of Mama Grande. She was one of the Portuguese families that lived in Amiga that came out of Angola after Savannah. Because our tiffies in the beginning were all Portuguese. They started the Needlework Center, and they made everything. They made the berets for the people. They made the bonnies for the people. They made the jacket webbings or the chest webbings. They shortened your pants. They fixed the tears in your shirts. They were there to look after the people, and we were fortunate to have that. So when we didn't get stuff in Grootfontein, if I could find a roll of Nutria, it used to fall onto the back of my truck accidentally, and I would take it to the Needlework Center, and they would make things out of it, especially the bunnies and stuff like that. So the X sort of almost built up a reputation. When they saw our trucks arriving, or the bunnies that we were wearing, or they saw it was a 3-1, or for that matter 3-2 guy. I can remember going into Rundu sometimes when they used to take a guard from the gate, and he stood on the side of the truck, and he would go with us. They wouldn't let us out of their sight, and they would stay with us until we left the base. So yeah, there was a bit of resentment, and the guys weren't stupid. They knew we were there to come and get stores, and that was also part of the reason. It built up a culture, and it took a long time until the people realized how well the Oaks were doing in the bush and how well they were working, for them to sort of start accepting the people. But even right up until when I left there in 86, in 85, when were we, Dion, when were we in Nkongo? Were you in Nkongo? When you came back in your one camp? One of the OCs at 5-4 Battalion at Inana, he didn't let our guys sleep in the base. Not at all. They had to stay outside the firewalls, or whatever you call those. So there was still a lot of that stuff out there, but it was a lot of resentment, jealousy, as you call it. Our people were, especially with the Bushmen, they could tell you when they looked at the ground, they could tell you which bird walked past and had a broken feather in his wing and that left a mark on the sand. They were that good with it. Simple as that.
Well, there is something called in Afrikaans a waardering. Now, I don't know if the term is familiar to the army guys. But in the police, we use that quite often when we got close to any army base. We would make a waardering, and I remember having a pool table once, which we had need for, I have to say as well. But now I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, a hard question. And I ask this to the colonels and commanders as well. Not long ago in Switzerland, in Swineland, I spoke to one of their military officers. And he actually heard about 3-1 Battalion. And he came up with a statement, and you can tell me whether it's true or not. He said that they were a bunch of war criminals when they were part of Fletcher, or the Fletchers under the Portuguese rule. And then they got themselves sort of hijacked by you people. He was describing it almost like slavery, you know. The guys got pulled down by their necks there, like a bunch of slave trade there down to South Africa where they were forced into service. Now, gentlemen, I know this is the biggest bullshit I've ever said to you on air, but I'm duty bound to ask you about it. Ziggy, you're picking up your finger. What do you think of such people?
It's sad that people should say that because I spoke to, look, they were part of the DGS or something, the special police and stuff. And one of the Portuguese, I actually got a letter that was sent to me and then eventually handed to Colonel Lindford. I'm trying to think of Cardozo or something like that. They were a special unit. I've got photos where the Bushmen were neatly dressed and they were part of the Fletchers. The Fletcher means arrow in Portuguese. And that was a special force. So irrelevant of who gave you that information, I think the guys should go and do a bit of research. Look, I get into trouble. As ek 'n laer rang, so hou ek nie my mond nie. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry. They were, I can remember Antonio Sabal, not Antonio Sabal, sorry, Victoria, when Antonio Sabal left my platoon to go to, what was the other unit, the other Bushman unit, but in any case, he was gone for a while. Victoria, I used to come into Victoria's tent. He didn't have a Kimbo yet. He had a tent. And Fires can back me up. That's my assistant corporal. When you walked into Victor's tent, it was neat. The Bible was always on the table. He sat down to a meal with his wife. He was always neat. I've got photos. My wife met him too. And for someone to say a bunch of criminals in it, I'm sorry to say, the leader group was so well that they disciplined them. We didn't discipline our troops. The leader group, the Bushman leader group did. And I always respected them because I was a youngster. You know, Matok, Katoka, whatever, and all the different names. They were much older than us. They'd been through a war, not through a scavenging war and stuff. They were neat. They were not rogue. So I totally disagree. It's easy to break down a unit if you didn't serve with them. I can say anything about any of you, but I don't know your full side. But after 14 months with the Bushmen, I still respect them till today.
Die mense, if you look at the history of the Bushmen, in Serpa Pinto, Colonel Lindford met them. They respected him. The Portuguese people respected him. So at the end of the civil war in Angola, they came south. They weren't killed by our guys. They were killed by their own people. And they were met by our guys, and eventually they ended up at Alpha. And they were respected there. And I can tell you one thing, I've never seen that we dealt with them in a bad way. I've never seen it. I don't know if it was. They were always respected. And as you said, we respected them absolutely. And the guys talking nonsense. Excellent tackle. Hy praat nonsens wat dit is. Want hulle was ons makkers geweest en hulle was ons baase geweest eintlik in die hele storie.
Now I grew up in Namibia myself. I lived there for a few years, and I really love the place. Always say to my wife, if there's one country in Africa we can actually go to, it's that one. But the Bushmen in those days had quite a reputation as skaap stealers, what do you say that in English, stock theft, that type of thing. Whether it's true or not, I wouldn't know. But that was a reputation, and we are here at Legacy to break down reputations, to find out if the rumors are true or not true. So let us ask the logistics fellow, Uncle Bob. So did you ever have problems with Bushmen taking things away from your stores which they were not entitled to?
No, I must attest to the fact that I never ever, in all the 6 years that I lived there, ever had a problem like that. I can tell you one thing though, historically, it's a story that goes, when the people hear Bushmen, then they think back to when Jan van Riebeeck came here, they used to go and hunt the Bushmen because they used to steal the sheep and the cows and whatever the case may be. It isn't so. They may shoot a buck in the bush. It happens to be a reserve, but they don't consider it as theft. I can tell you something now about the Bushmen that I experienced in Omega. If you've got 5 pairs or 4 pairs of pants and he has none, he'll go and take one. And you can ask Donnie and them, Charlie Company, and he will wear it. And when he's tired of wearing it, he will bring it back to you and he will say, thank you very much for letting me use your pants. But he doesn't steal. He just doesn't steal. He's just not. I never had a problem in the stores, ever. Never, ever. Not with weapons, not with food or clothes or anything like that. Never, ever. No, not from the. If any, it was our own white fellows. But definitely, they used to raid my clandestine store. But the Bushmen-wise, never. I don't think it's in their culture. Not that kind of stuff, you know. They came out, Donnie, who is that the Dominie that passed away a little while ago? We had a preacher there. He brought a whole tribe or a whole group of Bushmen out of southern Angola, and he walked with him all the way to Omega. He passed away now. He was their leader. What was say, Donnie? What was his name? I can't think now. They'll know. I can't hear what they're saying now, but they'll tell you. He came out with his whole entire group of Bushmen. Mario Mahanga. And there was nothing. They came to be with Colonel Linford because he was known as their godfather. End of story. I don't think it was a case of they robbed anybody or were chased. They were chased out of there because they were killing them, and they left because they felt safe with Colonel Linford or Commandant Linford in those days. That's why it was called Alpha. And they came in their hordes. I mean, as I said, I attested it to it. After a couple of years, there were close on 5,000 Bushmen living there, and that's a lot of people. That's not a small amount of people. But personally, never. I as a stores guy, I never had never ever. I don't think I ever. No, never. That certainly happened. You never even thought about it. I don't know if the other guys feel differently or what they have to say about it, but certainly not on my side.
Bob, I agree with you. I mean, we had tapes and radio. They loved the radio. I mean, a radio is always a commodity but you left your cassettes, your speakers, everything. You went to we never locked our Kimbos. Our Kimbos were open the whole time, and the Bushmen had access to the lines. The old driving, we called it a driving. There was a couple of locks, and we didn't remember when Sonia Harold and I mense grens toe gekom het. They didn't come to 3-1 Battalion, they went to Grootfontein. So our entertainment was movies. We would have the driving, and my Kimber was two Kimbers away from it in the walkway nearby a bin. And you didn't even worry about that because all the Bushmen came to watch too in our lines. And your bungalow, your Kimbo, wasn't locked. There was never theft of any item. Yes, Uncle Bob's right. When I got there, we raided the store. We climbed through the little mesh on top for condensed milk and extra cost. I mean, I'm one of the guilty buggers. Now, I'm to blame the Bushmen. Sorry, they didn't do it. So, and another thing is, alcohol was restricted to them. They were only allowed 2 beers. En ek moet dit noem, Busman het nie 'n koue bier gedrink. They drank Black Label because they said it was a strong beer. and they put it next to the fire to warm it up because it gave more punch. They always said Makua drink en hy sê dit is lekker, maar die Bushmen hy drink om dronk te word. That was their point. But theft never. Theft never.
Okay, you can hear me. I can take it from the hilarious or the sublime to the hilarious. If there was any theft at Amiga, we had a time in the 70s. It might be there with Donnie and Jiggy. There were monkeys. The guys had a habit of bringing these monkeys, these whatever they were called, I don't know, back to the bush, back to the base with them. They found them in the bush and they brought them back to. So we ended up with a moor of a lot of monkeys there in that base, and they used to steal our stuff out of our timber. And you come home and you'd find your wallet was gone. But if you looked around, you used to see at the top, they used to make a little nest where they used to put all their stuff, watches and booze and things. The monkeys stole the stuff, not the Bushmen. If we had thieves in our unit, it was monkeys. That's why I think there was they had a big thing once where they got rid of all of them. How they did it, I'm not quite sure. I wasn't there at the time, but that was a problem. But Bushmen, no ways.
But what happened on patrol? When you leave a base for, I think, 6 weeks or how long you go out, what happens then? I mean, I know, Dion, you actually arrived with a helicopter and the guys are already in the middle of the field. You don't know any of them. And you step off and you take command. I mean, that must have taken a special kind of guts or craziness. I'm not sure which one.
Well, obviously, that very first episode of mine, that was very nerve-wracking. But you were so trained and you were so looking forward. And as I mentioned in the previous episodes, we wanted to be there. I wasn't called up there. I wanted to go there. It was my choice. I wanted to share the experience with the Bushmen and whatever. So taking over, like maybe 4 or 5 minutes after you landed, that's it. There goes the Puma with the previous leader group, and you stuck with this whole bunch of guys, and they're just staring at you and saying, "Okay, what WTF? What do I do now?" But you get introduced, obviously, to, and I happen to have Antonio Sabah, extremely knowledgeable, brilliant soldier, excellent bushcraft, excellent person. I have the utmost respect for him till this very day, and he's still alive. He's still around. Old Antonio, but he's an old man now. Yes, so you get introduced, and he introduces you to the rest of the guys, and then I think we landed around about midday. So you don't really walk in the heat of the day. So the guys laid around, and you had like in a TV, taking a little bit of siesta, and then they started walking off. Now you're going to look for a place to TV for the night, temporary base. So you just like fall in and take his lead. I must admit, he helped me a heck of a lot. So that wasn't after that first 1 or 2 nights. Then it was fine. It was all good. But as I mentioned earlier on as well, they did try and push me to see if I could take the punch, and which I do. And if you think about it, I mean, here's these 3 white lighties getting off the Puma now. They're my new leader element. 2 like 1 stripers or 2 stripers. No, they were 2 stripers. I had a 1 pip. If they felt threatened, they would sure as heck make it known. But once you're part of them, it's a whole different mindset. You can see by their demeanor in the bush whether you can relax, whether you need to be sharp and focused, just by the way they either communicate or walk. That I always found that extremely fascinating. But and the guys would be talking and carrying on with each other while you're walking through the bush, and the next moment you just hear them all go quiet. Then you know, okay, clearly there's something happening. Whether it's elephants, whether it's enemy, whether both, but they knew what was coming. They knew what was happening, and the moment you realize that the skill they have, that you're as safe as can be, by far, and yeah, the knowledge of the bush, the bushcraft is sensational. It's stuff that you cannot read up in books. You cannot learn about it at university or anything. It's just stuff you have to learn on the ground. I loved it, and look, direction keeping. I'm still, even if I go hiking in the bush or whatever now, I don't need a compass. I know where north and south is. I can find my way around. I can. The funny story is the first time I did a camp with Durban Light Infantry. The guys were bundu bashing from Beacon 25 back to Inanna, and the guys were looking for a compass, and I said, "Man, just there. We could just have to hit this direction. It's right there. It's about 16 clicks." No, how do you know? And when we came out of the bush into the clean strip, the base was right in front of us. I said, I was with a Bushman. You pick up these skills from them, but yeah, Donnie tells the story always really, really well. That you like on patrol and through the Hackensteek in the thorn bushes and whatever, and it's hot, and the next moment the guys are just chucking their kit down, and like 10 of them running towards this tree, and 2 of them up in the tree, and the next moment out comes the little Bushman axe and chopping away at the tree, and then they come out with this cake of wild honey, like bonus stuff. But obviously there's nothing else around, otherwise they wouldn't do that. If there was enemy in the vicinity, it would be a different scenario. But it's just amazing. It's amazing how little things that just sticks in your mind that you will never forget. Never, not as long as I live will I forget it.
Janie, ek dink I went through a change in time when I arrived in the base. Like Dion was saying, in the bush, I was dropped off after I climbed off the recce clearing. I ended up in Kwando base with a rat run, and Jorge, our Frans Gunter, our OC, took me out with a Gary on the cup lane and dropped me off by Swazi and Fires. That was my first introduction with the Bushmen. And coming out of infantry school, the first thing the evening is I thought, aren't we going to do our, the gods and that sort of thing with the lankies and all these gemors. At the end of the day, Swazi said to me, no, we don't do it that way. Now you go and lie down. Luckily, we were still in the Caprivi on the cup lane. Because, jy's a roofie and, you're going to war. And you sleep uncomfortable that night because there's no guards. And the next morning, Swazi called a Bushman and said, "Vat vir die korporaal," and he took me out and he showed me exactly what animals, before we even got to the spoor, he said to me, last night there was this animal, that animal, leopard, lion, whatever. And the Marquis we had close encounters with lions and stuff too. I mean, that'll come out in the book. But they will show you the tracks that you just have to believe them. I mean, there was an evaluation where a lieutenant was sent out from South Africa to evaluate us, and he failed us because we didn't have the guards at night, and then we also showed him. But things were not the same in the base. And like I say, I went through different phases. We had the clandestine phase where you got your kit, and in the back of a Unimog, you went to the cup lane, you changed into camo. Like Donnie said, everyone knew you were going, but I think it was more for the guests and stuff that might have been in the base. But you changed your kit, and your kit was sent back, and you ended up in camo. My first one, we actually heard vehicles approaching and immediately threw a ambush, and it ended up being what was the guys? Not MPLA, the UNITA. It ended up being UNITA because we were in the Kwando Kabango area. Now, there's a famous photo that I call Coca-Cola in Angola, and you'll see us in camo drinking Coca-Cola. But that was that specific one. Then we moved later on to Zambia. Well, that was in the Kwando Kubango, that's Angola. And then we moved, this was still Unimogs. And when we started operating from the Kwando base, it was basically first on the cup lane, then we were sent in with helicopters, dropped and left, and everything by foot, no vehicles, no support, up to 300 kilometers in the Matabele Plains and that. Later on, we got buffels. And when we got buffels, we got 4 buffels for a company. Now, there's min buffels. We loaded, our buffels were loaded to full capacity with ammunition and food. And we would sit on top of when they say Kufut started the, what you call leapfrog situation, I think we started. We had too few vehicles, so we would put a platoon, 2 platoons out in front and 1 platoon resting, and the buffels would tag along behind, and we would catch up, change, and that's how the whole leapfrog situation happened. So yeah, vehicles were scarce. We couldn't steal vehicles; it was big groter tires. But at the end of the day, well, if we could, we would have. I mean, there's an incident where I was called on orders by the RSM of Katima Malimo, me and Prop Bath. We were standing on the back of a buffel when he stopped the buffel, and we had to climb down, and we were on orders, and Jorge came to the rescue. And his words were, he used a bit of swears, I'm not going to say it here, but he told the RSM in a short term, you know, my guys ride in the bush standing on the back of a buffel because there's not enough seats. And now you expect them to strap in a base. And we got away. So ons was aangekla, but what was that, R1 or DD1 or whatever was torn up. And that was my time. So yeah, I never did one operation in Namibia or Southwest Africa those days. Every operation was either the beginning, I think it was 2 ops in Angola, and the rest was in Zambia. And like I say, with no support, air support took up to half an hour, 45 minutes. So when the popo hit the fan, you had to fight. Ammunition-wise, Dion mentioned carrying your own radio. Ongelukkig as ek 'n groot ouetjie nog steeds, I carried a mag, and I carried a radio, and I carried 3 103 grenades. The 103, when I came from infantry school, you learn to take the belt and put the sights up and put the 103, put the ballast in, and daar staan jy, booms, daar skiet jy, real conventional type thing. When I saw the Bushmen picking it up, putting it in their arm, I thought, holy moly, such a small guy can shoot a 103 from his shoulder. I say, if you pull it into your shoulder, you can take that punch. It's like a lummy. But in one specific contact, I think we were about 80, 90, well, can we say 100 guys? And we were hit by about 300 plus. I didn't have time to count, but the Slim Owen said that we were hit by about 300, 350 guys, and it was hell. But I still say till today, you take 80, 90 people firing off 103s, it didn't kill anyone, but the noise must have been astronomical, and I think that saved our butt. You know, the fact that every person carried 2 to 3 103s, and we walked. Each guy had a 103 on his R1. So that was our first line of defense: lay down a massive attack and then put fire down. A noise, jy maak geraas, maak hulle bang, and so yeah. I think that is short and sweet. As ek te veel begin praat, dan gaan ek die boek al skryf hierso. Ek dink Dani raak aan die slaap en ek net sy bokant van sy kop. So Dani, over to Dani. Dani was before me. I mean, our time when Dion was unlucky, he was dropped off and left with the Bushmen alone. Luckily, I had Swazi that was already 6 months in with the Bushmen. So my experience, and Donnie actually arrived at 3-1, I think, with Swazi and that. But the war developed from a very clandestine to a very bush war, and eventually even the older guys like Divies and those guys. Divies has got a beautiful story where we talk about being kicked out of the base. I think I sent it to Donnie. That will also come out in the book, how he was kicked, the whole company was kicked out of the base and they had to provide for themselves. Divies puts it in a good way, but that will come out in the book.
Internet, I think what Ziggy just said, that it was a special unit, and those who were not there should rather keep quiet. It is too polite to say that, but I'll say it. And I think at the end of the day, for us to learn about this unit, about 3-1 Battalion, 201, the Bushmen, we really need to speak to more of these people, and we need to follow their story. And I'm glad to tell you that they said they will bring us a few men, and they will come and tell us about it. So I'm inviting all of you listening here, if you want to know more about the Bushmen, come and listen to what they have to say. And lastly, don't forget about their raffle. I don't know when you're watching here. It might be a few years from now, and then it's long gone. Someone would have won it. I hope it's me and my wife, but we never know. Probably not. But there is a raffle going. There's a raffle going which is costing 50 rands a ticket. You can get a very absolutely genuine Bushman bow and arrows. You can get it. And they're also writing a book. And that book is only to come out in about 2024, which I believe is the 50th year of their anniversary. And that's something to look forward to as well. So if you're looking at this and it's still 2022 and before, I would say the end of October or around about there, please contact. The details are in the description. Get hold of that raffle ticket. Let us support these people to get their book out and come back to legacy. Like we keep on talking to the Bushman Battalion. So until we meet again, God bless.